You're nothing but an overpaid babysitter for test tubes. Rita's voice echoed through the laboratory hallway, her words hitting me like a physical blow. I stood there, gripping my clipboard tighter, watching my supervisor's face twist with the same disdain she had shown me for months. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed ominously, casting harsh shadows across the pristine white walls of Bright Hall Medical Center in Memphis, Tennessee. My name is Janet Morrison, and at 57 years old, I had dedicated my entire career to laboratory medicine. For the past 12 years, I had served as the certified laboratory director at Bright Hall, overseeing all diagnostic testing operations that kept this mid-sized clinic running. What Rita Henderson, my direct supervisor, failed to understand was that my position wasn't just a job, it was the backbone that held the entire diagnostic operation together. Rita, you know the federal regulations require my specific certifications for this lab to maintain its operational status, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. Without a certified laboratory director with my credentials, we cannot legally perform any diagnostic testing. She rolled her eyes, dismissing my concerns with a wave of her manicured hand. Please, Janet. Any competent technician can handle what you do. You act like you're some irreplaceable genius when really you just sign off on paperwork all day. I felt my heart sink as I realized she truly believed her own words. Rita had been promoted to operations supervisor 6 months ago, fresh from the corporate headquarters with an MBA and zero understanding of medical laboratory regulations. She saw dollar signs where she should have seen compliance requirements, and my annual salary of $120,000 looked like an easy target for budget cuts. The clinical laboratory improvement amendments require specific board certifications and continuing education that I maintain, I explained, trying one more time to make her understand. My credentials are tied directly to our laboratory license. If I leave, the entire diagnostic operation shuts down until a replacement with equivalent qualifications can be found and approved. Rita's laugh was sharp and dismissive. You're being dramatic as usual. Dr. Patricia Coleman will be back from her medical conference next week, and I'm sure she'll appreciate the cost savings I'm implementing. She leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed, already mentally spending the money she thought she was saving. Face it, Janet. Your time here is coming to an end. The ominous warning in her tone sent chills down my spine. As I walked back to my office, passing the humming centrifuges and automated analyzers that processed hundreds of patient samples daily, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rita was planning something far worse than just making my life difficult. The way she had been scrutinizing my work, questioning my decisions, and undermining my authority with the laboratory staff told me that this confrontation was just the beginning of something much more devastating. My relationship with Bright Hall Medical Center ran deeper than most people realized. When I first arrived 12 years ago, the clinic was struggling with laboratory compliance issues, failed inspections, and a revolving door of temporary directors who couldn't meet the stringent federal requirements. Dr. Patricia Coleman, the clinic's owner and chief executive, had personally recruited me from Kelwind Regional Hospital, where I had successfully transformed their laboratory operations from a liability into a profit center. Janet, I need someone who can not only meet the regulations but exceed them, Patricia had said during my interview. This clinic serves some of the most underserved communities in Memphis, and our patients depend on accurate, timely diagnostic results. Can you help us become the laboratory that sets the standard for excellence? Her passion for patient care had resonated with me immediately. I had spent the previous 8 years watching corporate healthcare destroy the personal touch that made medicine meaningful, and Patricia's vision of a clinic that prioritized patients over profits felt like a breath of fresh air. Within 6 months of my arrival, we had achieved perfect inspection scores, expanded our testing capabilities, and increased laboratory revenue by 40%. The irony wasn't lost on me that Rita now wanted to eliminate the very position that had saved the clinic. She had been hired during Patricia's temporary absence, brought in by the board of directors who were concerned about rising operational costs. Rita's background was in corporate restructuring, and she approached healthcare like any other business that needed streamlining. These doctors think every position is sacred, Rita had confided to me during her first week. not realizing she was revealing her fundamental misunderstanding of medical practice. In the real world, you cut the fat and improve the bottom line. That's how you stay competitive. What Rita didn't understand was that my certifications weren't just credentials on paper. They were federal requirements that carried the force of law. The Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, established by Congress and enforced by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, didn't care about budget concerns or corporate efficiency. Without a qualified laboratory director, our facility would lose its ability to perform any diagnostic testing, from basic blood work to complex molecular diagnostics. I had tried repeatedly to explain this to Rita, even providing her with copies of the relevant regulations and our current licensing documentation. But she dismissed my concerns as job protection tactics, convinced that I was exaggerating the importance of my role to maintain my position and salary. The most troubling aspect of Rita's attitude was her complete disregard for patient safety. Our laboratory processed nearly 2,000 patient samples per week, providing critical diagnostic information that guided treatment decisions for everything from diabetes management to cancer detection. The thought of disrupting this essential service because of budget cuts made my stomach turn. As I reviewed the day's quality control results and signed off on the final batch of patient reports, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if Rita actually followed through on her threats. The patients who depended on our services, the physicians who trusted our results, and the reputation Patricia had worked so hard to build, all of it would be at risk because Rita couldn't see beyond the numbers on a budget spreadsheet. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 3 days before Patricia was scheduled to return from the International Laboratory Medicine Conference in San Diego. I arrived at work to find Rita waiting in my office, a manila folder spread across my desk, and a triumphant smile plastered across her face. "Good morning, Janet," she said, her tone sickeningly sweet. "I hope you had a wonderful weekend, because it's going to be your last as an employee of Bright Hall Medical Center." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" She gestured to the papers on my desk with theatrical flair. "I've been reviewing your performance metrics, and frankly, they don't justify your inflated salary. The board has approved my recommendation to restructure the laboratory operations, and that restructuring doesn't include your position." I stared at the termination paperwork, my hands trembling as I read the effective date. Today. "Rita, you cannot do this. The federal regulations explicitly require—" "I've already spoken with Human Resources," she interrupted, clearly enjoying her moment of power. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out once you've gathered your personal belongings." The crushing realization hit me like a physical blow. She was actually doing it. After months of threats and intimidation, Rita was following through on her plan to eliminate my position, and she genuinely believed she could operate the laboratory without a certified director. "You don't understand," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "My certifications are directly tied to our laboratory license. When I'm terminated, the automatic revocation clause in my employment agreement triggers, and our federal certification becomes invalid immediately." Rita's smile faltered for just a moment before returning with renewed smugness. "That's just scare tactics, Janet. Any of our senior technicians can handle the paperwork while we find a cheaper replacement." "This isn't about paperwork," I said, pulling up the federal database on my computer. "Look at this. Our laboratory license number is tied to my National Credentialing Agency certification. When my employment status changes to terminated, the system automatically flags our license as non-compliant." She leaned over my shoulder, squinting at the screen. "That's just bureaucratic nonsense. We'll call them and explain the situation." "There's no explaining," I said, my voice growing stronger as I realized the magnitude of what she was about to unleash. Federal law doesn't have exceptions for budget cuts or staffing changes. Without a qualified director, we cannot legally perform any diagnostic testing. Not blood work, not urinalysis, not molecular diagnostics. Nothing. Rita's confidence was beginning to crack, but her pride prevented her from backing down. "You're being dramatic, as usual. The laboratory will function just fine without you. As security arrived to escort me out, I looked back at the laboratory that had been my professional home for over a decade. The humming equipment, the dedicated staff, the thousands of patient samples that would soon have nowhere to go, all of it about to become collateral damage in Rita's misguided cost-cutting crusade. The most heartbreaking part was knowing that Patricia would return to find her life's work in ruins, destroyed by someone who had never understood what they were actually managing. The moment I stepped out of Brighthall Medical Center for the last time, my phone began buzzing with notifications. The federal database systems were already processing my employment termination, and the automatic alerts were cascading through the regulatory network like digital dominoes falling in rapid succession. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching through the windows as Rita strutted through the laboratory, presumably explaining to the stunned staff that business would continue as usual. The irony was almost amusing, if it weren't so devastating. Within hours, she would discover that confidence couldn't override federal law. My phone rang, displaying the number for Wellspring Medical Group, Brighthall's primary competitor across town. Dr. Harrison Blake, their chief executive, was calling personally. "Janet, I just received an automated notification that your credentials have been revoked at Brighthall," he said, his voice filled with concern. "Are you all right? What happened?" Harrison and I had maintained a professional relationship over the years, often collaborating on complex cases that required specialized testing capabilities. Despite being competitors, we shared a mutual respect for laboratory excellence and patient care standards. "Rita Henderson terminated my employment this morning," I explained, feeling the weight of the situation settling over me. "She believes any technician can replace me and doesn't understand the regulatory requirements." There was a long pause before Harrison spoke again. "Janet, this is catastrophic for them. Without your certifications, they can't perform any diagnostic testing. Are you telling me Rita doesn't understand that she just shut down their entire laboratory operation?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," I replied, watching as confused technicians began gathering in the laboratory windows, probably wondering why their computer systems were displaying error messages. "She thinks this is just administrative paperwork that can be sorted out with a phone call." Harrison's next words caught me completely off guard. "Janet, I've been hoping for an opportunity to expand our laboratory operations, and frankly, I've always believed you were wasted at Brighthall. What would you say to joining Wellspring as our Director of Laboratory Operations? The position comes with equity participation and a significant salary increase." I felt my breath catch. "Harrison, I appreciate the offer, but I just lost my job this morning. Are you sure this is the right time for such a conversation?" "This is exactly the right time," he said firmly. "Brighthall is about to lose every single laboratory patient when word gets out that they can't perform testing. Those patients will need somewhere to go, and I want Wellspring to be ready to serve them with the highest quality laboratory services available. Under your leadership, we could become the premier diagnostic center in Memphis." As we spoke, I watched Rita emerge from the building, her face no longer triumphant, but confused and increasingly panicked. She was holding her phone to her ear, presumably dealing with the first wave of system alerts and regulatory notifications. "The timing is certainly interesting," I admitted, feeling a spark of something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope mixed with the delicious anticipation of poetic justice. "What kind of timeline are you considering?" "I can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow morning," Harrison said. "Our board has already approved the expansion budget, and frankly, acquiring Brighthall's patient base would accelerate our growth timeline by at least 2 years. The perfect symmetry of the situation wasn't lost on me. Rita had eliminated my position to save money, only to hand our entire patient base to the competition along with their most qualified laboratory director. The financial impact would be devastating. Not just the immediate loss of laboratory revenue, but the long-term damage to Brighthall's reputation and patient relationships. "Harrison, I'm very interested in discussing this opportunity," I said, watching as more Brighthall staff members gathered in the parking lot, clearly dealing with some kind of crisis inside the building. "When can we meet?" "How about this afternoon? I have a feeling your former employer is about to have a very difficult day." and I'd like to be prepared to help those displaced patients as quickly as possible. As I drove away from Brighthall, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Rita's attempt to eliminate what she saw as unnecessary expense was about to become the most costly mistake in the clinic's history. By 2 p.m. that same day, the full scope of Rita's catastrophic decision was becoming clear throughout Memphis's medical community. I was sitting in Harrison's executive conference room at Wellspring Medical Group, reviewing the generous offer package he had prepared when his assistant knocked on the door. "Dr. Blake, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're receiving calls from several physician offices asking about emergency laboratory services," she said. Apparently, Brighthall Medical Center has suspended all diagnostic testing indefinitely. Harrison and I exchanged knowing glances. The news was spreading faster than we had anticipated, which meant the regulatory agencies had wasted no time in notifying healthcare providers about Brighthall's non-compliant status. "How many calls?" Harrison asked. 17 in the past hour, she replied. "And Dr. Morrison? There are several messages specifically asking for you by name. Word is getting out that you're no longer with Brighthall." The validation felt bittersweet. These were physicians who trusted my work, who had relied on the quality and accuracy of our laboratory results to guide their patient care decisions. Now they were scrambling to find alternative testing facilities, because Rita had dismissed my warnings as job protection tactics. My phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Sarah Chen, one of Brighthall's primary referring physicians. "Janet, heard about the lab closure. Can you recommend alternative testing facilities? My diabetic patients need their monitoring results ASAP." Then another from Dr. Michael Torres. "What's happening at Brighthall? Our morning lab orders are all being rejected by the system." And another from Dr. Rebecca Foster. "Janet, please tell me this is temporary. We have cancer patients who need their staging results this week." Each message reinforced the human cost of Rita's decision. These weren't just abstract regulatory violations. They were real patients with urgent medical needs who were now caught in the chaos of Rita's incompetence. "Harrison, I need to accept your offer," I said, setting my phone aside. "These patients can't wait for Brighthall to figure out their regulatory nightmare." "I was hoping you'd say that," Harrison replied, sliding the contract across the table. "With your reputation and relationships, we can have these physicians transferring their laboratory orders to Wellspring by tomorrow morning." As I signed the agreement that would make me Wellspring's Director of Laboratory Operations, with a 30% salary increase and equity participation, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Patricia Coleman's number. She was calling from San Diego. "Janet, please tell me what I'm hearing isn't true." Patricia's voice was strained with panic. "I just received a call from our attorney saying we've lost our laboratory certification. What happened?" "Rita terminated my employment this morning," I explained calmly. I warned her repeatedly about the regulatory requirements, but she believed any technician could replace me. "Oh my God," Patricia whispered. "Where is she now? I need to speak with her immediately." "I'm not sure, but based on the physician calls we're receiving, I suspect she's dealing with a lot of very angry doctors and confused patients. Janet, we need to fix this. Can you come back? Name your price, whatever it takes to restore our certification." The desperation in Patricia's voice was heartbreaking, but the damage was already done. "Patricia, I've already accepted a position with Wellspring Medical Group. Even if I wanted to return, the certification process would take weeks, and you'd need board approval for the salary it would require to make that worthwhile." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Patricia was beginning to understand that Rita's decision hadn't just cost them my services. It had potentially destroyed everything she had built over the past 15 years. "I'm so sorry, Janet," she finally said. "You deserved better than this." As I hung up, Harrison was already making calls to expand our laboratory's operating hours and bring in additional staff to handle the influx of patients we were about to receive. The next morning, I arrived at Wellspring Medical Group at 6 a.m. to find the parking lot already bustling with activity. News of Brighthall's laboratory closure had spread throughout Memphis's medical community overnight. and physicians were scrambling to establish new testing relationships for their patients. Harrison met me at the entrance, his face flushed with excitement. "Janet, we've received over 200 laboratory order transfers since yesterday afternoon. Our phone hasn't stopped ringing." As we walked through Wellspring's expanded laboratory facility, I could see the staff preparing for what was clearly going to be the busiest day in the clinic's history. The contrast with my last day at Brighthall couldn't have been more stark. Instead of confusion and panic, there was organized efficiency and professional excitement. "Dr. Morrison," called out Lisa Chen, one of Wellspring's senior laboratory technicians. "We're so honored to have you join our team. The physicians have been asking specifically for your oversight on their complex cases." The warmth of the welcome was overwhelming after months of Rita's hostility and disrespect. These professionals understood and valued laboratory expertise, and they were genuinely excited about the expansion opportunities my arrival represented. My phone had been buzzing constantly since sunrise with messages from physician offices, former Brighthall colleagues, and even some of the more experienced technicians asking about employment opportunities at Wellspring. The exodus from Brighthall was happening faster than anyone had anticipated. At 9 a.m., Harrison's assistant brought me a particularly interesting message. "Dr. Morrison, I have Rita Henderson on line 2. She says it's urgent and concerns regulatory compliance." I looked at Harrison, who nodded encouragingly. "Take it. I'm curious to hear what she has to say." "Janet, thank God you answered." Rita's voice was completely different from yesterday's smugness. Now she sounded desperate and exhausted. "I need your help. The federal agencies are saying we can't reopen the laboratory without a certified director, and the replacement candidates are saying it could take 6 to 8 weeks to complete the credentialing process." "That sounds about right," I replied calmly. "The background checks and verification processes are quite thorough. But we can't survive 8 weeks without laboratory revenue," Rita continued, her voice rising with panic. "We're losing patients by the hour, and the physicians are threatening to sever their referral relationships permanently." "I'm sorry to hear that, Rita, but I'm no longer a Brighthall employee. Perhaps you should discuss these concerns with Patricia when she returns." "She's flying back early," Rita said quickly. "She'll be here this afternoon, and she wants to meet with you about returning. We can offer you a significant raise, additional vacation time, whatever you need." "I appreciate the offer, but I've already committed to Wellspring Medical Group," I said, watching as another batch of laboratory orders arrived from former Brighthall physicians. "Even if I were interested, the damage to your certification status would require starting the entire approval process from scratch." "You're saying there's no way to fix this quickly?" Rita's voice was barely a whisper now. "The regulations don't have emergency provisions for staffing decisions," I explained. "You eliminated a federally required position, and there are consequences for that choice." After hanging up, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was certainly satisfaction in seeing Rita face the consequences of her arrogance. But I also felt genuine sadness for Patricia and the innocent staff members who were suffering because of one person's poor judgment. "How did that go?" Harrison asked, appearing with a cup of coffee and a wide smile. "About as well as expected," I replied. "Rita is beginning to understand that federal regulations don't bend for budget concerns." "Well, their loss is definitely our gain," Harrison said. "We're already ahead of our annual growth projections, and it's only been 24 hours. As I settled into my new office and began reviewing the day's quality control procedures, I couldn't help but appreciate the perfect irony of the situation. Rita's attempt to save money by eliminating my position had instead created the perfect storm that launched my career to new heights while potentially destroying everything she had tried to protect. 3 days later, Patricia Coleman returned from San Diego to find her medical practice in complete chaos. The scene that greeted her would have been comical if the consequences weren't so devastating for everyone involved. I learned the details from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, one of Brighthall's primary care physicians, who had decided to establish her laboratory relationship with Wellspring. She called me that Thursday afternoon, still shaking her head in disbelief at what she had witnessed. "Janet, you should have seen Patricia's face when she walked into the laboratory," Jennifer said. The entire diagnostic operation was shut down. No testing, no results, no revenue. Rita was standing there with a stack of regulatory violation notices, trying to explain why she thought firing you was a good idea. The confrontation had been swift and brutal. Patricia, normally composed and diplomatic, had apparently unleashed months of frustration on Rita in front of the entire laboratory staff. "What have you done, you fool?" Patricia had shouted, her voice echoing through the empty laboratory. "Do you have any idea what you've just destroyed?" Rita, according to Jennifer, had tried to defend her decision by pointing to the potential salary savings, but Patricia cut her off with devastating precision. "You eliminated the one person whose credentials kept us operational to save money?" Patricia's voice had grown dangerously quiet. "That person whose salary you thought was too high? She was generating over $2 million in annual laboratory revenue. The financial reality was stark and undeniable. My position cost the clinic $120,000 annually in salary and benefits, but the laboratory operations I oversaw generated nearly 17% of Bright Hall's total revenue." Rita had eliminated a position that paid for itself more than 16 times over. Jennifer told me Rita actually tried to argue that they could hire a replacement quickly, I shared with Harrison, as we reviewed Wellspring's dramatically improved quarterly projections. Patricia apparently laughed, the bitter kind of laugh, and told her that the credentialing process alone would take 2 months, assuming they could find someone willing to join a clinic that had just demonstrated such spectacular regulatory incompetence. The immediate closure of Bright Hall's laboratory had created a domino effect that went far beyond lost revenue. Patient relationships that had taken years to build were severed overnight. Referring physicians, unable to trust a clinic that couldn't maintain basic operational compliance, were transferring their patients to other facilities. Insurance companies were demanding explanations for the sudden cessation of diagnostic services. By the end of October, just 2 weeks after my termination, the full scope of Rita's catastrophic decision had become clear throughout Memphis's medical community. Bright Hall Medical Center, once a respected mid-sized clinic serving over 8,000 patients, was facing potential closure. Patricia had called an emergency board meeting to address the crisis, and according to the rumors circulating through the medical community, she had presented them with 2 equally devastating options: pay massive federal fines for operating without proper certification, or permanently shutter the laboratory and lose nearly 20% of the clinic's revenue base. Meanwhile, Wellspring Medical Group was experiencing unprecedented growth. Under my leadership, we had expanded our laboratory operations to handle the influx of former Bright Hall patients, hired 3 additional technicians, and established relationships with 12 new referring physicians. "Janet, the October numbers are extraordinary," Harrison announced during our weekly management meeting. "We've increased laboratory revenue by 68% compared to last month, and patient satisfaction scores are at an all-time high." The success felt surreal after months of Rita's constant criticism and undermining. Here, my expertise was valued, and my decisions were respected. The laboratory staff looked to me for guidance rather than questioning my every move, and physicians called personally to express their appreciation for the quality of our diagnostic services. Rita, meanwhile, had become a pariah in Memphis's medical community. Word of her regulatory disaster had spread quickly, and her reputation for cost-cutting over compliance had made her unemployable at any serious healthcare facility. Patricia had terminated her employment within days of returning from San Diego, but the damage was irreversible. The most satisfying aspect of the entire situation was knowing that the patients were receiving better care. Wellspring's larger facility, more advanced equipment, and expanded testing capabilities meant that former Bright Hall patients were actually benefiting from Rita's short-sighted decision, even as the clinic that had abandoned them faced potential bankruptcy. Rita Henderson's attempts to cut costs through regulatory ignorance ultimately cost Bright Hall Medical Center over $3 million in lost revenue and forced the clinic into bankruptcy proceedings within 6 months. She never found another position in healthcare management, her reputation permanently destroyed by the most expensive personnel decision in Memphis medical history. Patricia Coleman, despite her efforts to salvage the practice, was forced to sell the remaining assets to cover federal fines and patient compensation claims. As I stood in my corner office at Wellspring Medical Group, reviewing our year-end reports that showed record-breaking growth and patient satisfaction, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. Rita's arrogance and ignorance had inadvertently launched me into the most successful phase of my career, proving that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply allowing incompetent people to face the full consequences of their own poor decisions.